and today we're talking about Layman's Brute. And our table of contents are quite easy because we simply divided them into two parts: introduction and more about Brute. So about its author, Layamon. Layamon was an English priest and poet who was active around 1190 to 1215, and he was a parish priest in Worcestershire, England. And he's quite famous for this poem, Brute, because he played a crucial role in transitioning English literature from Old English to Middle English. And about the work, Brute. Brute is an epic poem composed in Middle English using alliterative verse. So its prominent literary devices are, of course, alliteration, but there is also kennings. So what is kennings? Kennings are compound metaphorical expressions. To just give some examples are whale-road, which refers to the sea, and a ring-giver, which metaphorically refers to a lord or a king, and bonehouse referring to body, and battle sweat refers just the bloodshed during combat. More about its content and storyline. It is a poem composed late 12th century, and it offers sort of a history, legend, and cultural motifs just blending in, and it reflects the societal values of that time. And this work, which spans over 16,000 lines, is actually a poetic rendition of the Anglo-Norman Roman Dead Brute, which is another work, and of course Geoffrey of Monmouth, Latin, that work. Yeah. So this text is actually a cornerstone of Arthurian literature because it provides insights into the evolution of the Arthurian legend, story, and the language of that time. Its key themes are 5 listed here. There is heroism and kingship, warfare and conquest, loyalty and honor, fate and destiny, and of course, national identity and origins. But this one will be further discussed by my good mate. And I like to present 2 examples regarding these 2. About loyalty and honor, I think Arthur's knights who demonstrated just unwavering loyalty to him, and this I think embodies the values of chivalry and camaraderie. And fate and destiny, I think Arthur's rise and eventual departure, well, to Avalon, is a self-fulfilling destiny. Its origin and adaptation. Well, Layman actually adapted this work from Wace's Anglo-Norman, this work, and its original source is this one. This is Geoffrey of Monmouth's Historia Regum Britanniae.
My name is Andy. So, after introducing the Layamon's Brute, we may make some comparison to its former work, History of Kings of Britain, or in Latin, Historia Regum Britanniae, written by Geoffrey of Monmouth, and Roman the Brute, written by West. First, the languages of the 3 texts are different. For History of Kings of Britain, Geoffrey used Latin to emphasize the rigorous and formal character of his text, and West, as a Roman poet, used Old French to write the adaptation of Geoffrey's work, in order to let those Norman nobles read the story and understand the history of Britain. On the contrary, Layamon chose not to use French, but to use Middle English to adapt West's work. From this, we can notice the element of localization from choosing writing languages. Next is the literary devices. The history of the kings of Britain seems to be prose, while the latter 2 are more like a verse. For West's work, he uses octosyllabic rhyming couplet with alliteration and ring, while there is also alliteration in Layamon's work. Take the first to the 8th line from 2 texts. For instance, we can note that West's work, there is alliteration because most lines have similar letter and pronunciation in the beginning of each line. And we can see the form of ring is AABBCCDD, RRTTUUEE. And in each sentence has 8 syllables in Old French, which is some different from modern French. In comparison, for Layamon's Bruce, there is some element of alliteration, but much looser than Weiss's. For example, W, L, V, R, H, and so on, or some apparent alliteration. Also, there are a lot of things about the tale's plot. In general, the history of Kings of Britain has a narrative with a plain line, which is just like a historical text. In West, some fantastic elements emerge in his work, and until the Layamon Brute, lot of fictional details are added, which makes the tale more specific, and has a Germanic and heraldic flavor, much more than Weiss's work. Take the Round Table legend, for instance. In History of Kings of Britain, there is nothing about round tables, until Weiss created the tale of Rounded Table in his work. Layamon adapted Weiss's thing and added more about the story of Round Table, and he especially elaborated the contest in Arthur King's palace. Second thing is King Arthur. In History of Kings of Britain, King Arthur is described as a brave general, but he became a great king after Roman's Brute and also elaborated his character. Layamon added more details and he especially used a lot of adjectives to depict King Arthur's character. Nonetheless, there are still some common points among the three texts. An example is that the tale of these three can trace back to the legend of Aeneas during Troy's War. In order to explain the origin of Brutus, who is seen as the ancestor of British people. And that is a comparison among the three texts.
I'm Claudia, and I will be introducing features and historical significance of Layamon's Brut. And I'm going to introduce it in two parts. One is its national identity and English heritage, and also it is one of the origins of the Arthurian legend. First, before we dive into this topic, I'm going to introduce an edition by Sir Frederick Madden's. It's a three-volume edition with a cross translation for the Society of Antiquaries. Basically, it is after the edition that the academic gives the academic world more space to talk about Broad because of the cross translation. And with more discussions and discourses coming on, a lot of scholars have different point of views about things. One of them, which is one of the things that fascinates me the most, is Broad as a witness of linguistic and cultural changes after the Norman conquest. And I want to just introduce two editions. One is the Cotton Caligula, a 9 edition, and the other is the Cotton Odyssey 13 edition. Basically, the Caligula one resembles, it has a style that is closer to Old English, appears to employ a style more fully reminiscent of Old English discourses than all the other manuscripts do. And the other edition, the author edition, lacks traditional features, contains a version of the poem that lacks many features scholars generally interpret as constituents of traditional rhythmical alliterative style, such as compounds, digressions, and rhetorical repetition. If you guys still remember Beowulf, which I believe you all do since we just literally just finished it, Beowulf utilized a lot of compound words. And this feature can also be seen in the Caligula version. It maintains some elements of the reliance on compound words, in particular using them to emphasize issues of royalty and the viability of the kingdom. While on the other hand, the author edition avoids compounds with relative consistency, specifically lacking words that in the Caligula version emphasize racial division within the developing English nation. This is fascinating for me because it's basically the same work, but how it's interpreted, maybe due to some political considerations, or maybe just because Layamon's Broads was written in time after the Norman conquest, and basically after that incident, a lot of cultural has been affecting each other. So it has such a big difference, even though it's the same word, but two different editions. Also, the next one, Anglo-Welsh cultural resistance to Norman, is actually a little bit related to this. So one of the scholars examined some of the most important cultural signifiers in medieval English and Welsh culture, and also the method by which the poet, Layamon, adapts and grafts them together to form a cultural amalgamated text, and found out that the Broad was written in a way that is not completely English, but also not completely Welsh. Basically, simultaneously, Broad has features of both English and both Welsh. Moving on, I believe you all know that Layamon Broad is also one of the origins of Arthurian legend, and also the first one written in English. But I also want to let you guys know that it is also the first one to suggest Arthur's return, which is really interesting for me because nowadays in pop culture, when we think of Arthur, we think of him as a really heroic figure, really strong, really powerful. But that wasn't really the case in the first like two editions. But in Layamon's version, you can see the quote, and I was fair to Avalon, skip a few parts, and Elf most fair, and she shall make my wounds all sound. And in Geoffrey's version, Arthur was severely wounded in the end, but in Layamon's version, even though Arthur was also severely wounded, he suggests that Arthur will heal and eventually return, which is closer to our pop culture. And lastly, this version is also the first to introduce magical elements. So before that, no elves, no Merlin, no magician, which basically rips a really important and really fascinating part of our modern Arthurian culture. So Layamon as a unique episode where elves enchant the newborn Arthur, bestowing upon him qualities such as unparalleled knighthood, future kingship, longevity, and virtues like generosity. And this passage is absent in the works of Geoffrey of Monmouth and the one in French. So, and the other one is that Arthur Merlin's magic, when Uther, Arthur's father, was disguised for murder. This is also a part specifically occurs in the Layamon's Virgin. And I want to end with one concept, which is the liminality of heroes, which is also a characteristic we can see in Beowulf. Basically, the word liminality, or liminal, is a place of transition or between destinations. And by that definition, literally just any hallway or road would be a quote unquote liminal space. So both Beowulf and Arthur, we all know they're just normal people, they're kings. But at the same time, even though we know they're just normal people, they're not like wizards or like powerful dude, but in the same time they can showcase some really, really powerful moves and some things that you know that people cannot do, or maybe like have magic powers, or maybe they have like really, really big strength. And that is the kind of liminality of heroes, is being able to do what normal people cannot do, like superpowers. Thank you.
Now I'm going to wrap up our presentation with a closing thought. Why is Brute still relevant today in the discussion of medieval English literature? The first thing is it embodies blending culture influences. For example, the text preserves the pagan and Christian elements. It shows the interpretation of the different beliefs. Also, King Arthur is a legend with the deep roots of Celtic, and Arthur is depicted as a warrior king in the Anglo-Saxon tradition, but also with elements with Norman chivalry. And this allows us to study how different traditions are mingled together. Second is that Brute is important because it is a transition between Old English and Middle English. Brute, as one of the earliest major work in Middle English, demonstrate the transition of Old English language to another language that is influenced by French and Latin after the Norman conquest. It blends the oral tradition of Old English poetry, such as alliteration and heroic themes, with French literary elements, such as the rhyming couplets. Also, Layamon expands upon the Arthurian narrative. To make Arthur a more heroic and warlike king, he introduced new dramatic battle scenes and prophecies that reinforce Arthur's role as a national mystic figure, making him look like a more heroic image. Finally, Brute connects Britain's legendary origin to Troy, and this emphasis on British history and mythical storytelling in Brute is echoed and has a really strong impact on the later literature works. While we are studying Layamon's Brute, we also found many related researches, and these researches shows us what topics are researchers interested about Brute. And here are some examples. The first thing is the creating of national identity, and the study of national identity are explored in different links, such as the portrait of women character in Brute or the narrative of the post-Norman conquest. These study focus on how these topics are portrayed in the Brutes and how does it influence the evolving of the national identity. Another topic is kingship and myth. Like King Arthur is a really mystical figure, and how does this influence upon his kingship? Also, there are some discussion about the supernatural creature. How does these supernatural elements influence or disturb upon the kingship is also a topic. Finally is the linguistic studies. In these kind of studies, they focused on the word selection. How does the word select influence the whole narrative of Brute? So these are some related research topic about Layamon's Brute, and this is our presentation for today. Thank you for listening.